Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this 3 o'clock session in track 2, where we are about to hear from Miriam Rigby, Franny Gaede, Catherine Flynn-Purvis, and David Condon, all from the University of Oregon. And they're speaking on the topic of, or the title of their talk today is, Wait, you don't have an open access policy? Passing an OA policy in 2021. I'm Janine Rockwell-Kincannon. I'm the committee member moderating this session. Once again, I will remind you that you are welcome to add questions at any time during the presentation. We will have time at the end to respond to those, but you are welcome to add them at any point. Please do use the Q&A button on your Zoom screen, and comments and questions and tech troubles can go into the chat. I think that's everything. So welcome to our presenters. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for introducing us. My screen actually froze during that. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. I was happy to come back and see you're still talking. So I will start sharing my screen. And yeah, welcome to our talk. Wait, you don't have an open access policy. So our plan today is to talk for about 20 minutes, leaving the rest of the half hour for questions and conversation. And I'm Miriam Rigby. I'm a social sciences librarian.
Hi, I'm Kathy Flynn-Purvis, and I am the institutional repository manager at U of O.
And I'm David Condon. I'm an assistant professor in the psychology department with a secondary research interest in open science methods and open access.
And Franny Gaede can't make it today, unfortunately. I'll be reading her parts, so you can kind of use me at times. She's the director of our Digital Scholarship Services Center. There we go. Oops. There we go.
Okay, so we will try to condense the last 20 years of history. Open access at the University of Oregon has been moving and shaking for over 20 years. Starting in 2001, when the University Library Committee sent a report to the UO Senate with a variety of recommendations related to author rights. They included calling upon researchers and their professional societies to put pressure on major publishers and entreating the Academy against punishing faculty during tenure and promotion for refusing to publish in journals with, quote, business models detrimental to the free circulation of ideas, end quote. A second resolution was passed in 2008, focused on author addendums and protecting the rights of faculty authors. In 2009, the University Libraries passed a comprehensive OA policy committing to self-archiving in our DSpace institutional repository Scholars Bank. The Department of Romance Languages passed a similar policy shortly thereafter. In 2010, the Dean of Libraries established an APC fund to support faculty publication in OA journals, but this was not renewed when funding ran out. Between 2010 and 2020, the libraries would hold educational events during Open Access Week, but that was about the extent of our campus-wide activities. With respect to faculty publications in the IR, we've met demands of late career faculty with large bodies of work, worked with Romance Languages faculties, and many others upon request. So in December of 2019, a subcommittee was established under the purview of the University Library Committee of the UO Senate. The charge was to review the current landscape of OA, analyze its role at UO, consider the renegotiation of our Elsevier contract, and recommend next steps. So the group wrote a 44-page white paper and executive summary to fulfill this charge. Meanwhile, our Elsevier contract was extended for another year, so we declined to weigh in on that. We'll provide more on that white paper later in the presentation. And of course, now we're looking at renegotiation with Elsevier commencing in the coming months. So jumping to October 2020, the UO Senate passed a resolution charging the subcommittee to develop an open access policy for UO. And we were able to celebrate its passage on May 19th 2021.
Oops.
Well, in order to carry out all that great work that was just described for you by Kathy, we want to talk a little bit more about the process. And one of the first steps was the need to organize a team of folks who were interested and willing to advocate for open access around campus. So this included several individuals, not only from among the library services faculty and staff, but also advocates among the faculty more broadly, and in fact, the administration of the university too. So coming into the 2019, we have, maybe I'll just ask if anyone has their microphone on, maybe they could just double check that it's turned off if it should be. Anyway, coming back into the 2019-2020 academic year, feels like a long time ago now. One of the first steps was for our acting library dean, Mark Watson, to pitch the provost's office on an initiative to increase open access awareness and efforts all across campus. And this led to negotiations, discussions, and eventually further support from the University Faculty Senate and outreach to faculty, again, as I say, from several departments across campus. And it was at that stage that the Senate Subcommittee on Open Access was formed as an official body with representation from OA experts in the library and faculty outside, including me and others, and several representatives from our university library committee. This committee was then formally asked to to carry out several different steps of a broader charge, but it mainly can be summarized in sort of two primary aims. These were to prepare a report evaluating the state of open access broadly, the whole landscape, and then to make some recommendations about what OA means for UO specifically. So in other words, to summarize what's happening and then think about what the University of Oregon should do going forward.
So the Senate Subcommittee on Open Access, which I think this actually jumped again, unfortunately. No, that's good. Sorry. The Senate Subcommittee on Open Access, which was us plus a few other people, spent our first year of work assessing and documenting the state of open access at the University of Oregon and current movements and trends in the world at large. So this was from the fall of 2019 through spring of 2020. And one of our major goals was to document this thoroughly so that we could show that we had done our research and could have something to establish the grounds from which we would recommend actions to take. So we ended up spending much of our first year researching and composing a substantial white paper. And then because it was very long and thorough, we made a much briefer executive summary. So you just kind of get glimpses of that on our slide here. The white paper and executive summary provided great advocacy tools, which I'll talk about later. But the actual process of writing it proved to be very educational for our working group. There were a number of campus partners on the Senate subcommittee who either had only experience with a particular aspect of open access or who hadn't had much recent experience with it at all. So in the process of composing this document, they provided excellent editorial eyes to help us phrase and frame topics for our campus community. And they also learned quite a bit in the process. I remember one of our group members, in fact, was very open to the idea of open access, but hadn't understood many aspects of it, nor all the benefits that could come from open access done well. And in the process, not only did she give great feedback on misconceptions and clarifications that we needed to address, but now she's a strong advocate who can really speak to the concerns of faculty. As this slide shows, we really tried to cover everything that might come up in a conversation about open access, just looking at kind of the table of contents of our open access white paper here. From misconceptions of what open access means to the many types of open access publishing to all the projects already happening at the University of Oregon, from our institutional repository to faculty deeply involved in OA publishing as editors of journals or founders of field-based repositories, like David here is one of the founders of SciArchive. and then the many types of OA projects that the UO Libraries contributes to with funding or in-kind support. And then we addressed all this in terms of the types of barriers specific to the University of Oregon that might keep us from advancing certain open access projects, such as departmental differences across campus and financial barriers. And finally, we concluded with suggestions of projects to pursue, one of which was to advance an open access policy.
Right. Right. So yeah, one of the rewards for all of the work that we carried out in that first year that Miriam just described was to have our open access committee reconstituted again the following academic year. And of course, there was quite a lot going on at this time with COVID and everything. And it wasn't necessarily planned in advance that the group would be reconstituted, at the end of that first year. But in looking back, I think it now probably we could take more credit for that idea than we did at the time. It made good sense for our work in that first year, the 2019-2020 academic year, to then be followed by the development of an OA policy that that really would work for the entire university community. So to be clear, a major motivator of that work in our second year then with the committee, the Open Access Committee, was to develop a consistent and hopefully clear message policy that that would be appealing and hopefully supported by all of the producers of research across campus. That task proved, I think, in many ways more challenging than we anticipated. In some ways, I think it was even more challenging than what we did in the first year. But the reasons, again, make pretty good sense in retrospect. It wasn't so much the amount of work. I would say most of the heavy lifting that needed to be done was actually done in that first year in terms of developing the resources that we needed and doing the research to get everyone on the same page across campus. No, but the challenge stemmed more from the need to engage with a very diverse group of stakeholders and to identify a policy that could accommodate all of these, very different needs and concerns from people just working in heterogeneous departments and areas of research. So the process began with discussions around, the possible adoption of a template policy. As you can see in some of the images on the slides here, we did consider some of the, quote unquote, off the shelf policies at the very beginning. But, that approach was revised pretty dramatically early on. And I would say we got farther and farther away from that as we went through drafts and town hall meetings, and received input from members of the university library committee that I mentioned before. And in the end, it really was very important that we stayed flexible throughout the process. And also I would add too, not only flexible, but it became increasingly clear that, we had to use very specific language. And some of the language, discussions actually were kind of humorous, the degree of specificity that we really had to be sure to include, just so that we could, address these sort of fundamental differences among the workflows of different research groups around campus. In fact, I'm comfortable saying there was a stretch during that 2020-21 academic year, so the second year that the committee was in place when we were really working on the policy. There was a stretch that I didn't think we would be able to come up with a policy. I mean, that's how intense some of the disagreements were. And in fact, I said as much in a meeting of our university library committee. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get this done, but we're here talking about it today. So we were successful in the end, and thanks in large part to the perseverance of Miriam and Franny and Kathy.
So the actual policy here, and forgive me, these are definitely Franny's area of expertise that I'm filling in for. I will go through sort of the presentation that we gave on the policy and whatnot, both to the library, to campus partners, this is also the presentation essentially that we gave of the policy to Faculty Senate. So here we have the preamble, all the whereases, and these statements were written to remind all stakeholders what we're doing and why we're doing it. As of yet, there have been no objection to any of the sentiments on this slide. There shouldn't be. These are all incontrovertible statements of fact. These are the whereases of what's already happened and what is happening at the UO. Indeed, a number of segments are derived from the university's own mission statement. The most controversial of these must be the third, Sorry. And it probably went through the most edits to ensure more neutral language replaced the clear advocacy espoused by earlier drafts, that talking about those commercial publishers out there. We wanted to make sure we weren't being problematic with that statement. It was more important to us to build alliances, encourage slow and steady change, and if possible, win the unnecessary but exciting unanimous vote that we did get, than to score points or to take a bold stance at this particular moment in time. If we were successful, we could build on that success in the new future that we made possible with better informed and approving stakeholders. And so we walked through the policy. And so the next few slides will all be the same policy, but with different highlighted parts. This statement here, the university faculty shall henceforth make a journal allowed version of their article. So this is really following journal guidelines. Sorry, I'm going to skip over a little bit of Franny's talk, which will make this a little awkward, but here we go. So we didn't want to go away from what a journal would permit. Given that compliance with the publisher policy was and is so important to faculty, and the conversation around our OA policy, we wanted to raise awareness of existing resources that make a compliance as straightforward as running a lightly finicky database search, like looking in, sorry, oh my goodness. So just, making sure that people can figure out how to evaluate places, different terms. So here we've got our Scholars Bank, our discipline-specific open access repository, as one place that people can deposit to comply with the policy and with their publishers' demands. However, we do note that if someone's already publishing open access in different ways, if they're taking advantage of our article processing charge to make their article open access through an open access journal, or putting it into archive or SciArchive or so on, that would work with this policy. They don't have to put something into our institutional repository. And then the goal is, in order to improve access and dissemination of our faculty's works. So the main issue here, our faculty researchers are busy. We want to make this easy. We want to make it clear why they would go along with this. And we came up with a lot of issues in wording this. Shall, I think David may have already mentioned, shall was a huge problematic term for certain people, whether it was a must or a should or a shall. We didn't want this to be a mandate, it's a policy. And we don't have time to enforce, we don't have time to enforce a policy. So we're making this faculty come to it and give yes. We want people to have a positive orientation and build positive momentum. So if people can't comply with that shall because of the publisher or because of a variety of reasons, we're not handing out punishments with compliance. So the policy is really written to encourage participation, but without like a strong arm of the law behind it necessarily.
Hey, so as many of you know, I'm sure that it often comes down, success comes down to communication with a new policy, and advancing our policy to this point and passing it through our University Faculty Senate was not a simple process. It required extensive communication across many campus groups and strong advocacy and educational efforts to make sure that people were aware and understood the project and its goals. Our main venues for communication included 2 town halls. One was aimed at all of campus and another was held for our own library staff. We needed to make sure that everyone had a chance to hear about the project, process its aims, and to ask questions. The University Library Committee was essential for our work. Committee is a UO Senate group comprised of 12 to 13 campus partners, including faculty across the disciplines. They collaborated with us to assess and reflect upon our work, providing guidance and recommendations. Because they're also a unique group of campus partners with a high interest in the workings of the library, we needed to make sure to pursue outreach to other groups who may be less aware or invested. We work closely with the leadership of the Faculty Senate, consulting with them on the type of policy we were putting forward and planning the timing of our information sessions and Senate presentations. And then we created a webpage, which was a critical public-facing place to share pieces of information, collect feedback, and post our documentation. And finally, we relied upon our subjects librarians to communicate out to their liaison departments at key points in the process.
So now David will talk more about the webpage momentarily.
I'm so sorry. I need to interrupt. Miriam, I think your mic is really picking up a lot of extraneous noise.
Sorry.
Paper rustling or
Yeah, I'll try
just
something a little different here.
Thank you.
Okay. We want to reflect back on the white paper as a tool for advocacy and knowledge building. The white paper and the executive summary were posted to our open access webpage and shared around to the Faculty Senate leadership and other campus partners such as the Provost's office. I'm sure you can all imagine many of the questions that come up when you're trying to advance a new policy across the university. And so while the white paper had many uses, sorry, I'm gonna rustle some paper here for a second. Such as helping us build our group's own knowledge. One of the most critical bits of work the white paper accomplished was to establish the legitimacy of open access in our particular cause, the OA policy. Anytime someone had a question of what about this, or does that matter? How is this other organization doing something because they're so important? We could point them towards this gigantic document, which both answered their questions and also just gave them something really solid, compiling the state of open access, such that if they really wanted to dig deeper, they had it all at their fingertips ready to go. But on the other hand, if they're just trying to make sure we'd really considered the many aspects of these issues, they could skim through and feel confident that we really had, without having to take that deep dive themselves in that moment. And I don't mean that disparagingly at all. Academics just really like to see that you've done your research, but they don't necessarily have the time to dig into it. It really is convenient not to have to keep considering and reconsidering many questions as they come in, and instead have this document to share that can answer most of them. But of course, the white paper wasn't the only way we shared information.
Right. We also had this webpage that Kathy and Miriam had mentioned a couple of times. So we just have a couple slides left here. In the interest of time, I think I'll trim things back a bit. But you know, again, you know, like the white paper, the website actually really played a very strategic role. It wasn't just a data dump, which, you know, I guess you might suspect it was in part that. It was a place where we documented everything we were doing. But you know, it served as a home for the white paper. It included, you know, a long listing at one point of FAQs, you know, ones that we had anticipated, and also questions that people around campus had been asking. There was, I guess by now you can tell there was, you know, quite a lot of discussion, and maybe even uncertainty is a good word for just the idea that we were proposing a new policy, you know, that would affect the workflows for many different groups on campus. And so the website really sort of pulled it all together as, you know, from my perspective, and it really benefited quite a lot too from Franny and some other folks in the library who have a lot of expertise around this thing. The one other point I might mention, right in the middle there, you know, when you have time, if you're interested in looking at some of what we did, you might check out this really great video. It was sort of a primer on open access that served to, you know, help bring people who didn't know much about what OA is or how it might affect their own work. It served to bring them up to speed, and was really, really a good sort of, I don't know, more interactive way of interacting than the longer white paper.
All right, and so then finally, the impact of all this, and I will also be brief so we have a little time for questions. Basically, there's been a lot of iterative and helpful interaction of all of our different open access activities to share information about each other. And so the UO Faculty Senate did in fact pass this open access policy in spring of 2021. And faculty are encouraged to deposit in our Scholars Bank institutional repository. And we've made a variety of ways for them to do this easily. We have a form with buttons where they can choose, I want to deposit kind of my whole backlog of work with some help, or I'd like to just deposit this recent publication, so that when things come out or when they think about it, they can come to us with a variety of ways they'd like to interact with this policy. We do have, as mentioned before, a lot of different open access venues where we're supporting open access, but when we talk about one, we can talk about another. And so just for instance, with the higher level of understanding of open access on campus and this fund of the article processing charge that we have to pay for open access fees, we're getting more questions about, well, can I comply with the open access policy by publishing and using the APC, or vice versa. If someone tries to apply for the article processing charge, but their publication doesn't count or doesn't match our qualifications, for that, we can point them towards these other options, such as field-based repositories like SciArchive, where they could place something. And that's something that David's worked quite closely with, and I'm on the member advisory board for also. It's a good example of a field-based repository. Or we can point them back to Scholars Bank and say, well, you can't get this fee paid by us, but we can publish at open access another way. And so we've had a lot of ways to kind of raise awareness while raising awareness of all the different things. And I think that impact has been kind of the best part of all of our open access efforts. And in the interest of time, thank you. And let's have a few minutes for discussion. Feel free to put those in chat or.
I don't seem to have access to the Q&A. Can I just ask my question like this?
Yeah, Thomas, I think us as panelists, we can't ask a question in the Q&A. So just ask your question.
Okay, so I'm looking at the policy on the site, and so it's my understanding that the policy is asking faculty members, or they're sort of tacitly agreeing to deposit work in the repository or in some other way, distribute it, but it doesn't appear to grant the university any sort of license. Is that correct?
Yes, we wanted to start with something fairly basic that would pass, is sort of the thing. There's a lot of questioning about, like, who am I giving licenses away to? And so we wanted to build from this. So we may get to a point where there is more kind of protection of faculty works by the university through licenses like that. But that wasn't where we were at yet.
Okay, so if I was working in the Office for Scholar Communication at this institution with this policy, I would check Sherpa Romeo for every single thing and make sure I wasn't doing anything that stepped out of line with that or with whatever additional changes to that standard license agreement a faculty member had made, right? Okay, great, thanks.
And no, Kathy, did you have anything more?
Oh, no, yeah, no, we're pretty careful about doing that as just a pro forma step.
And that is a service that we as the library can provide. So if faculty try to submit something, we can double check and make sure that they're in compliance.
Any last questions? We're just about out of time.
If there aren't any, I might just tack on a comment to that last one about, this is a topic that I think it was one of many things that where more education, part of what we did was help to educate about what licensing means for different, under different circumstances and different disciplines. And so that's also still on our to-do list, but that's a great example.
Yeah, having been engaged with a lot of this for much of these, or at least peripherally for these 20 years, it really does feel like this was a huge amount of traction.
Well, super. Thank you to David, Catherine, and Miriam, and Franny in absentia. I will stop the recording now.